Welcome to our comprehensive guide on the Specific Relief Act, 1963. This act, enacted by the Indian Parliament, is designed to provide remedies for individuals whose civil or contractual rights have been violated. It replaced the earlier Act of 1877 and aims to ensure that every legal wrong has an effective remedy. The act supplements the Declaration of Rights and Duties by providing legal tools for enforcement. Its core mission is to assure that whenever there is a wrong, there must be a remedy, whether through compelling contract performance or awarding monetary compensation. Let's explore the key provisions and remedies under this important legislation. Possession under the Act is more than just physical occupation. It consists of two main elements: corpus, which is the actual power and control over an object, and animus, the intention to exercise that control. This means a person must have both the ability and the will to deal with the property as they wish. Properties are classified as immovable, like land and buildings, and movable, such as securities and certificates. The distinction is crucial for determining the type of legal action available for recovery. Let's delve deeper into these property types and their legal implications. Movable property refers to assets that cannot be moved, such as land, benefits arising from land, and things attached permanently to the earth. The legal definition extends beyond the literal meaning, encompassing anything fastened to the earth or to something attached to it. This distinction is vital because the remedies and procedures for recovery differ significantly between immovable and movable property. Understanding what qualifies as immovable property helps in determining the appropriate legal recourse under the Act. Movable property includes all assets except those classified as immovable. Examples are government securities, share certificates, and other items that can be physically delivered or seized. Notably, money is not considered movable property under this Act. The property must be specific, meaning it is ascertained and identifiable. This specificity is important for legal actions seeking the recovery of movable property, as only the actual item, not its equivalent, can be claimed. There are three main legal actions for recovering specific immovable property: suits based on ownership title, suits based on possessory title, and suits based on previous possession where the plaintiff was dispossessed without consent. The last remedy is specifically provided under Section 6 of the Act, while the first two are governed by the Code of Civil Procedure. The essence of these actions is the concept of title, which may arise from ownership or possession. Even someone without legal title but with peaceful possession can sue if forcibly ousted. A person in long, continuous possession of immovable property can seek an injunction to protect their possession against anyone except the true owner. The law also states that an owner can only reclaim possession through due legal process. Suits for possession must adhere to the Code of Civil Procedure. Courts have clarified that all relevant provisions of the CPC apply to such cases, ensuring that the process is fair and consistent. Section 6 of the Specific Relief Act allows a person who has been dispossessed of immovable property without consent and not in due course of law to file a suit for recovery. This suit must be filed within 6 months of dispossession and cannot be brought against the government. Importantly, no appeal or review is allowed for orders under this section, but it does not bar the person from later suing to establish title. The focus here is on restoring possession quickly, not on determining ultimate ownership. The main goal of Section 6 is to discourage individuals from taking the law into their own hands, regardless of their claim to title. It provides a swift and cost-effective remedy for those dispossessed of immovable property, focusing solely on restoring possession. The section also prevents the dispossessor from using their own unlawful conduct to defeat the operation of the Act. However, claims for damages cannot be combined with possession suits under this section. Section 5 and Section 6 offer different remedies. Section 5 is based on title and allows a 12-year limitation period, while Section 6 is based on possession and must be filed within 6 months of dispossession. Under Section 6, even the rightful owner may be prevented from showing their title in the suit. This distinction ensures that possession is protected independently of title, emphasizing the importance of legal process over self-help. Right to seek recovery of possession is granted to the person who has been dispossessed or anyone claiming through them. This excludes servants, appointees, or those without juridical possession. Trespassers cannot claim relief unless their possession has been long-standing, peaceful, and established. The law ensures that only those with a legitimate claim to possession can seek remedy under this section. Section 6 also allows representatives and heirs of the dispossessed person to sue for recovery of possession. Possession is considered a heritable right, available against everyone except the true owner. This right extends to special cases, such as a Mohammedan widow who enters property in lieu of dower debt. Her heirs can retain possession until the debt is paid, highlighting the heritable nature of possession under the Act. Orders or decrees passed under Section 6 are final, no appeal or review is allowed. However, if a suit based on title is wrongly treated as a Section 6 suit, an appeal may be possible. This strict rule ensures speedy resolution of possession disputes, but also provides a safeguard for cases where the wrong legal basis is applied. Section 6 does not prevent a party from later establishing their title to the property and seeking recovery based on that title. Even if a suit under Section 6 is decreed, the party can still bring a separate action to prove ownership. This ensures that the remedy for possession does not preclude the ultimate determination of title, maintaining the distinction between possession and ownership. Sections 7 and 8 of the Act deal with the recovery of specific movable property. Section 7 allows a person entitled to possession to recover the property through the procedure in the Code of Criminal Procedure. The property must be specific, meaning it is ascertained and identifiable. Only those with present possession or a special right such as a bailee or trustee can maintain a suit under this section. Succeed under Section 7, the plaintiff must be entitled to possession of the specific movable property. either by ownership or by a special or temporary right. The property must be capable of being delivered and seized. If the property is no longer recoverable or not under the defendant's control, the plaintiff cannot obtain a decree for recovery. The limitation period for such suits is 3 years from the date of wrongful taking or unlawful possession. Person with a right to present or immediate possession, including bailees, pawnees, or finders of lost goods, can sue under Section 7. Trustees can also sue to protect the beneficiary's interest, and it's not necessary to make beneficiaries parties to the suit. The focus is on the right to possession rather than ownership, ensuring that those with a legitimate claim can recover specific movable property. Section 8 addresses situations where a person in possession of movable property, but not the owner, can be compelled to deliver it to the rightful possessor. This applies when the defendant holds the property as an agent or trustee, when monetary compensation is inadequate, when actual damage is hard to ascertain, or when possession was wrongfully transferred. The court presumes that compensation is inadequate in such cases, emphasizing the importance of returning the specific item. Specific performance is an equitable remedy where the court compels a party to perform their contractual obligations, rather than simply awarding damages. This remedy is granted when monetary compensation is inadequate, particularly in contracts involving immovable property. It is a discretionary remedy, and the plaintiff must specifically claim it. The limitation period for filing such suits is 3 years from the date fixed for performance, or when refusal becomes known. Section 9 allows the defendant to raise any defense available under contract law, such as invalidity of the contract, sufficiency of compensation, or the court's discretion. Specific performance cannot be granted if the contract is void or illegal, for example, agreements with minors. Delay, waiver, or third-party rights can also serve as defenses, especially if the delay results in prejudice to others. Section 10 outlines when specific performance can be enforced, when there is no standard for ascertaining damages or when monetary compensation is inadequate. The court presumes that contracts for transfer of immovable property cannot be adequately compensated by money. For movable property, exceptions exist if the item is unique, of special value, or held in trust. The court exercises discretion in granting this remedy. Specific performance is appropriate when the plaintiff cannot determine the amount of loss suffered, such as in contracts for unique items like a one-of-a-kind painting. If the damage is ascertainable, specific performance is not available. The focus is on situations where the subject matter is irreplaceable or its value cannot be easily measured. Monetary compensation is inadequate when the contract involves immovable property, unique movable goods, or items of special value or interest to the plaintiff. The court may also order specific performance if the property is held by the defendant as an agent or trustee. These scenarios highlight the importance of the actual subject matter over its monetary equivalent. Unreasonable delay by the plaintiff in performing their part of the contract can bar specific performance, especially if time was essential or if third-party rights have arisen. The law considers what is reasonable under the circumstances, and courts may refuse relief if the delay amounts to abandonment of the contract. Section 11 allows specific performance of contracts connected with trusts, provided the act to be performed is part of the trust. However, contracts made by a trustee in excess of their powers or in breach of trust cannot be specifically enforced. This ensures that only lawful and authorized trust actions are enforceable through specific performance. Section 12 generally prohibits specific performance of part of a contract, except in certain cases. If the unperformed part is small and can be compensated with money, the court may order performance of the rest. If a substantial part cannot be performed, the court may allow the other party to accept partial performance with compensation or relinquish claims for the remainder. The provision ensures fairness when full performance is impossible. Section 14 lists contracts that cannot be specifically enforced, those where compensation is adequate, contracts with minute or numerous details, determinable contracts, and those involving continuous duties the court cannot supervise. Arbitration agreements are also excluded, with some exceptions. The law aims to prevent courts from enforcing impractical or overly burdensome contracts. Despite the general rule, Section 14(3) allows specific performance in certain cases, such as contracts to execute a mortgage, pay for debentures, execute a deed of partnership, or construct a building if the terms are precise and compensation is inadequate. These exceptions recognize situations where specific performance is the only fair remedy. Section 15 specifies who can seek specific performance: parties to the contract, their representatives, beneficiaries of marriage settlements, remaindermen, reversioners, amalgamated companies, and companies accepting pre-incorporation contracts. However, personal contracts or those requiring unique skills may not be enforced by representatives unless certain conditions are met. Defendants can raise several defenses in specific performance suits, such as adequacy of compensation, impracticality due to minute details, continuous duties, determinable contracts, breach of trust, unfair advantage, hardship, questionable title, or the need for contract variation. These defenses ensure that specific performance is granted only when fair and appropriate. Section 16 bars specific performance for those who have obtained substituted performance, become incapable of performing, violated essential terms, acted fraudulently, or failed to prove readiness and willingness to perform. Courts have held that parties to illegal contracts or those not ready to fulfill their obligations cannot enforce specific performance. Rescission is the process of unmaking a contract, restoring parties to their original positions. Sections 27 to 30 provide for rescission in cases of fraud, illegality, or voidable contracts. The right to rescind may be lost if the contract is affirmed, restitution is impossible, third parties intervene, or severance is not possible. Courts may also require the return of benefits received under the contract. Section 26 allows rectification of written instruments when, due to fraud or mutual mistake, the document does not reflect the party's real intentions. Either party or their representative can seek rectification. The court may order correction if it does not prejudice third parties acting in good faith. Rectification ensures that the written contract matches the true agreement. For rectification, there must be a genuine agreement different from the express terms, fraud by one party or mutual mistake, and the mistake must be an expression, not formation. Rectification cannot affect the rights of bona fide purchasers for value without notice. The court may also allow rectification to be claimed during ongoing proceedings if justice requires. Sections 31 to 33 provide for the cancellation of instruments that are void or voidable and may cause serious injury if left outstanding. Any affected person can sue for cancellation, and the court may order the document to be delivered up and cancelled. Partial cancellation is also possible if rights and obligations are distinct and separable. Not only parties to the instrument but also those affected by it can seek cancellation. For example, creditors can sue to cancel fraudulent transfers that defeat their rights. The court exercises discretion in granting this relief, ensuring that only those with a legitimate apprehension of injury can obtain cancellation. Section 32 allows the court to cancel only part of an instrument if rights and obligations are distinct. This ensures that valid parts of a document remain effective while only the problematic sections are set aside. The court examines the separability of rights before granting partial cancellation. Section 33 embodies the maxim that he who seeks equity must do equity. A party granted cancellation must restore any benefits received under the contract and compensate the other party as justice requires. This ensures fairness and prevents unjust enrichment when instruments are cancelled. Declaratory decree is a judgment declaring the rights of the plaintiff, clarifying legal status or property rights. It does not create new rights but removes uncertainty and prevents future litigation. Declaratory suits are allowed only when expressly provided by statute, and the court exercises discretion in granting such relief. To obtain a declaratory decree, the plaintiff must show entitlement to a legal character or property right, that the defendant has denied or is interested in denying it, and that the declaration sought matches the right claimed. The plaintiff must also seek all available reliefs in the suit. The court has discretion to grant or refuse the declaration based on the circumstances. The objective of declaratory relief is to provide a permanent safeguard against adverse claims and prevent future disputes. The court exercises discretion, considering the nature of the right, the presence of real controversy, and whether all necessary parties are joined. Relief is not granted as a matter of right but depends on the merits of each case. Negative declarations, such as declaring the absence of a relationship, are maintainable in proper cases. However, if the plaintiff's rights are not affected, such suits are not allowed. The focus remains on resolving real disputes that impact the plaintiff's legal status or property rights. A declaratory decree is binding only on the parties to the suit, their representatives, and, in the case of trustees, on those for whom they act. It does not operate as a judgment in rem and does not bind strangers. The decree clarifies rights but does not create new ones or operate as res judicata. Preventive relief is granted when neither specific performance nor damages are adequate remedies. Injunctions, either temporary or perpetual, restrain a party from committing a wrongful act or require them to perform a duty. Injunctions act in personam and can be issued against individuals, public bodies, or the state. Disobedience can result in attachment or sale of property. Temporary injunctions are granted during the pendency of a suit to preserve the status quo, while perpetual injunctions are granted by decree after a full hearing. Temporary injunctions require a prima facie case, risk of irreparable injury, clean conduct by the plaintiff, and balance of convenience. Perpetual injunctions are final and protect the plaintiff's rights permanently. Mandatory injunctions compel a party to perform a specific act to prevent breach of obligation. They are granted when necessary to restore status quo or fulfill legal duties. Damages may be awarded in addition to or instead of injunctions if claimed in the suit. The court considers adequacy of compensation, balance of convenience, and conduct of the parties before granting mandatory relief.